off our conference, we are very, very lucky to get Steve Kirsch here. Steve is, I think, known to many of you here in the Valley. He is an American serial entrepreneur. He is an MIT alum. He's a very, very successful serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of at least 7 companies to my knowledge. We can discuss a little bit more in detail, but that is a significant number of companies. Mouse System, Frame Technology Corp, Infoseek, Propel, Abaca, OneID, and now a very, very ambitious Threesided market startup called Token, focused on the fintech payments space. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. He has a patent on the early version of the optical mouse, which is no small feat. He has a bachelor and a master of science in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. He has also used part of his fortune, a whole 75 million, I believe, to set up a charitable foundation. So he's a philanthropist as well. And I think we may or may not get into this, but it's public knowledge that you've been so engaged in scientific advancements for your own medical issues as well, and you have been experimenting with and I think benefited from science in very important ways. So we'll see where this discussion goes, but there are many, many things we could talk about today. I wanted to perhaps just let you tell your story, so I'll shut up now and I'll say, can you tell us about our journey, about your journey? And then we'll hear about what that means for our journey.
Long journey. I think, as a kid, I was very interested in computers. And when I was in junior high, I got associated with a group at UCLA that was working on computers. And it turned out that this was the ARPANET node #1. So the first node on what later came to be the internet. And so I had the fortune of working with the creators of the internet. So people like Vint Cerf and Len Kleinrock, John Postel, and so forth. And it was actually Vint Cerf, the father, the person who's called the father of the internet, and he told me that I should go to MIT, and so that led me to go to MIT, and went through and tried to work really hard on my grades and whatnot. But as I neared graduation with my master's degree, I got interested in inventing things, and I was actually using Lisp machines at MIT, and all the mice were broken. And so I thought, oh gosh, there had to be a better way to solve this problem than using mechanics. And so I came up with an optical mouse, and I showed it to Steve Jobs. And Jobs took a look at it, and he said, like the idea, but you need to lose the pad, because it ran on an optical pad. And so, but I put this together in just a few weeks. Time. So this is my first, kind of invention, so to speak, that was pretty cool. And so I ended up taking a job at Roland Corporation, and then I ended up kind of frustrated with the bureaucracy of big companies, and so I quit my company and started a company to make mice. And so I was the original supplier for Sun Microsystems and so forth. And so went on from basically company to company, and just look for things that were problems. And if I see a problem, I say, hey, there's a better way to solve this that people aren't doing now, and here's a way to solve it and go about doing it. So a lot of my startups, like the Abaca, which is an anti-spam startup, was because I was getting so much spam. I'd made millions of dollars, right? But I was getting so much spam. I said, gosh, this doesn't seem that hard to solve that problem. And we really, the world needs a better spam filter. And so it ended up taking longer than I expected, because I'm kind of a perfectionist, and I wanted to do something that was 2 orders of magnitude better than what was on the market. I actually succeeded, but it took me about 5 or 6 years to do that. So sometimes you can have the right approach, but if your market timing is bad, you can get killed. So that's kind of a quick
So I'm curious, and I want to probe a little on this, because there are a lot of people that see problems and want to solve them, but you solve them in kind of spectacular ways. What is the secret sauce here?
So I look at problems and I try not to solve them the way everybody else solves them. And so, for instance, we had an identity problem, or we actually still have an identity problem, a huge problem with cybersecurity. It's like we're using 50-year-old technology that was actually invented at MIT called shared secrets, which is more commonly known as usernames and passwords. And everybody hates usernames and passwords. So I said, gosh, we really ought to solve this problem. Big problem, nobody solved it. And so I got together with the top guys in identity and security, and we came up with, hey, let's think outside of the box. How would we do this? If clean sheet of paper, how would we solve this problem right? And it's like you have to sort of throw away all the ideas in terms of how people used to approach the problem, because all of those ideas have been tried and failed. And so I like to go and think, basically, sort of the Apple, think different. How can you look at this problem but take a totally different approach than everyone else took? And so we came up with a totally different approach, which we call trusted federated identity. And so instead of, like if you logged in with a Facebook account, you have to go and you hit a button and you go over to Facebook, and then Facebook tells the site that it's you. And the problem with that is that if somebody compromises Facebook, then the world comes to an end. And so it's a bad way to rely on federated identity. The advantage, though, is you have one identity. So I turned the problem around, and I thought, completely differently. So instead of giving your credentials to Facebook, what you would do is you would store your credentials, you would store crypto secrets in your device, and you would use those to go directly to the site. But you would also talk to your identity provider and say, hey, could you sign off on my keys to prove that it wasn't stolen? And you present multiple certificates to the site. And so this is completely different than anyone else had approached it. And so super successful. We had never gotten broken into. I went to a conference, internet nerds and guys who specialize in breaking into systems, and I revealed my username and password. Right? I mean, we sort of have a password. And people tried to break into my account. Nobody was successful. So we had an unbreakable identity system, which is exactly what the country needs. However, it turned out that even though this is like something that everybody wants, when we actually tried to sell it to sites, they said, well, we don't need that. It doesn't give us more revenue. So if I went to a site, it's not like you're going to get more revenue. And it only works if every other site has it and they're signed up for it, because we don't want any extra friction. So we couldn't sell it to the sites. We went to the banks, and the banks are super nervous about outsourcing identity. And then we went to the credit unions, and the credit union said, oh, we love this, but you have to talk to our supplier. And then their supplier said, well, when you have about 80 credit unions, come back and we'll take a look at it. So you have this wonderful solution to this problem that everybody in this room faces. That's a huge problem that costs the world, hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and we couldn't find any takers. We went to Google, they said not invented here. We went to Yahoo, they said, oh, you're too small of a company. Your technology works, but you're too small of a company. We went to Facebook, and they said, we don't need this. We're Facebook. We don't. This works fine, right? And so, so you can have these great ideas and solve these big problems, but product market fit, super important. So I resolved never to make that mistake again.
So I wanted Steve to peel back the onion a little bit, because today you speak in big words, deservedly. You have name dropped a lot of people, and you are plugged into the deepest echelons of what many people would regard as, the heart of Silicon Valley, the heart of power in the tech world. And speaking from someone who comes from a fishing village in Norway, how did you get there? And maybe, perhaps more interestingly, have you met any roadblocks that are interesting to share with other people? And we can go back to, I want to go back to MIT, but I want to go back before that. How do you get into a position like yours? It's just a simple question.
It's just a simple question. Luck has a lot to do with it. being sort of the right place at the right time, having interesting interests which happened to coincide with sort of mainstream interests. So I'd always been interested in computers. Started programming computers in the 6th grade in elementary school. And back then, our idea of a computer was something called an Alvetti Underwood Programmer 101. And it was a box that's like this size, and you had a magnetic card that went through it. But it's really following your passion, and my passion happened to lead to intersecting with a lot of interesting people. But it wasn't like I deliberately said, oh, I'm going to go, let's go see how can I meet Vint Cerf, or the internet's going to be really cool, or whatever. It just happened to be, you just happen to forge a path, right? And there are hundreds of millions of us in the United States, and everybody forges their own path. And my path just, happened to lead into some interesting places. And I got to meet a lot of interesting people along the way.
How much of this has to do with confidence? Because I'm sure that here in the Valley, if you have whether you have a company on a napkin or you have a company on a PowerPoint, everyone says they have a breakout idea. What in your mind differentiates? Is it the ideas that differentiate, or is it the way that people present them really that matters the most in the early days?
I think you need both. That a lousy idea, well presented, can do actually really well. But ideally, you have a great idea, and you put the passion behind it, and one of the things is you have an idea and you give up early on it. Oh, this is too hard, or what have you. Sometimes that can be a really good thing, because I see a lot of people with really bad ideas that try to make a business of it. And so, but if you have a really great idea and you can sort of prove it out, and not just that, in the case of one idea, we showed it to people. They said, "Oh, this is great. No more usernames and passwords." But we showed it to the wrong people, right? Because we needed to sell the sites rather than the end users, and we were really surprised that the sites didn't really care about what the end users thought. That was kind of really shocking. So even though you have a great idea and you have a lot of passion behind it, and you're getting people to subscribe to the vision, sometimes the market can work against you. In doing any kind of startup, it's like it's like a minefield out there to try to go, if you're here starting with your idea and that's, Apple computer at the far end of the room, you have to traverse the room, but the room, every single step you take can blow you up, and you've got to take a lot of steps to get there. So I was reading this. There's a book called Mission in a Bottle. Has anyone read that? It's about honest tea, the story of honest tea. And it's a great story. And if you're interested in starting a company, I highly encourage you to read it. I don't care if you're doing high tech or low tech or whatever. I mean, theirs was fairly low tech. But they pointed out at the very end of the book that this was a very long journey, and there were hundreds of places along that journey where they could have hit a place that could have totally blown up the business. And they were super lucky, or they were able to, this happened, we reacted to it, and so forth. But they came, every single time they came, that close from total destruction. And they persevered, and they got lucky. So it's sometimes, having a great, all these things have to work for you. It's, startup is just really, really hard.
So just one more question on this MIT background. A lot of very, very smart people go to MIT. Is there something in particular that you did when you were there that prepared you for this? Or would you say that, so to what extent does this MIT education play into what then later happened to you here?
Yeah, so I think some of the techniques that you learned, it wasn't the specific technology, but it was more the techniques of approaching a problem. So and sometimes it's very simple things, like at MIT they tell you, oh, hey, here's this really complicated problem, but if you break it down into 2 smaller problems or 3 smaller problems, or set this to 0 and solve it this way and whatever, that you can go and solve what usually looks, what to you would look like a really, really hard problem. And so that sort of learning, the the techniques that you learned at MIT then are applicable, not necessarily to those technical things, but they're applicable to other things in your life. And so when I designed the optical mouse, for example, I had a problem because I had to track the mouse in 2 dimensions, and I wasn't sure how to do that. But I used color. I had different colored LEDs, and the LEDs would, of course, make one set of lines disappear. So I had infrared LEDs and special infrared ink, and I had blue lines and red LEDs and so forth. And so the interesting thing was the blue lines, of course, would be invisible under infrared. And so I was able to take this very hard tracking problem in 2 dimensions, which would require a computer that I didn't have to solve that. And I just broke it down into one problem that's in the horizontal, which I could solve by four detectors going across the line. And then the other problem was in the vertical. And by breaking it up, it became a solvable problem, whereas I could never solve that as just looking at it without breaking it into 2 pieces. And so things like that are some of the things that you learn while you're at MIT.
So I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'm always one step behind him. That's what happened with brilliant people. Because I'm still at, how did you even get to Silicon Valley? Just get me there, and then we can get to all these ideas.
So after graduating from MIT, interviewing for a job, and happened to meet a guy named Jeff Rulifson, who used to work at Park and was starting the Office Systems Division at Rome Corporation. And I thought Rome was a pretty cool place to work because it was like very progressive in those days. It had a gym, and it treated its employees, really well. And that was unlike most companies in Silicon Valley at the time. And so I thought it was a cool place to work. He was a cool guy. He used to work at Park, and we got to invent the office of the future, and so that was what brought me out here.
Do you have any advice to, we put a lot of engineers on an airplane and said, come here, and they're interested, many of them, in going to the Californian market. What's your first advice to an entrepreneur or a company that's kind of trying to make it here with clients or investments? What is your advice to an MIT CEO founder who's coming here fresh off the boat a little bit, from the East Coast and meets the big California?
Make a lot of friends, network. I think it's really fundamentally at the end of the day, it's all about people and finding the best people. And when you look at the companies that have been the most successful, companies like Amazon, companies like Netflix, companies like Tesla. So when I toured the Tesla plant, I was just super impressed with the quality of the people there. They were all super brilliant, and what they've accomplished is just totally amazing. And that does not happen by accident. It happens because Elon Musk basically said when he hires people, he looks for people who are in the top 1%. And it's like, hey, if you're applying to work at Tesla, is what makes you different, what makes you special, what puts you in the top 1%. And if you can't answer that question, you don't get a job at Tesla. And so as a result, their company is just filled with people who are super remarkable. And those people attract other people who are super remarkable too, who want to work there because they get to work on cool stuff. And they work on a lot of cool stuff at Tesla. And so but their success was, I think, to a very large part on one, having a super great vision of Elon. Elon's vision is to not just create the best electric car, but to create the best car ever. So having a great leader who's able to raise the money and so forth, but it was also because he was really diligent about the quality of the people. So if you're coming to Silicon Valley, it's networking with people is, I would say, is probably the number one.
You've alluded to Tesla. What is going on in the Valley right now? If you wanted to capture the Valley in a couple sentences, we know the background, and if you've read the books, you know what has happened here. What's going on here right now? What is the hottest thing apart from Tesla?
Well, I think Apple's building, this car too. But I think technologies come and go. We're always inventing new stuff, and there are lots of cool things that get invented. And I think we've had like a dry spell, right? At CES, they said, hey, there was nothing like, this was the hot item. Maybe there's virtual reality. Seems kind of cool. Like I got the the Google VR headset, which I hate because you can't adjust the the distance, the interocular distance on those would be much better if that cardboard thing had a slot for that. But so VR I think is kind of cool. So drones of, I'm not sure why people are so excited about that, but my friend showed me, hey, his drone, shot this cool picture, and we were looking at it. And I looked at it and I said, man, that looks like it's professionally shot. You actually took that? So that's kind of cool. But I think there are sort of incremental inventions that we've seen.
Talk to us about incremental innovations. Your own startup, Token, you told me on the phone when we spoke, is tackling an incredibly complicated issue. And it involves three-sided markets.
Right.
Now, I know about two-sided markets. I'm not so sure about three. And why on earth would you tackle that kind of problem? And how are you going to succeed with it?
So I got into thinking that payments were kind of messed up. And the payment systems that we have today are based on most of the money moves in a 45-year-old system that's a batch system that runs once a day. Credit cards were invented 65 years ago, haven't really changed a lot since then. In the interim, people have invented things like Bitcoin, where you can move money at the speed of data. But we can't move the US dollar. We can move a Bitcoin, which is on the Bitcoin ledger, instantly, but we can't take a US dollar and move it around. There's no standard API to the banks. So if you go to the bank, we have a human API. It's called the World Wide Web. If we want to send email, we have a standard for that. It's called SMTP. If we want to move data, we have a standard called the internet. If we want to move value, though, there's no real standard for moving value. And that's because they're all different types of value. And so I thought, wow, this sounds like a great, hard, impossible problem to solve. And it's also a three-party problem, because you have to get, you naturally start with, the most interesting piece of value is money. And so you start with the banks, and then you have to get the merchants, and then you have to get the consumers, or you have to get the businesses and other businesses, and if you're doing B2B. And so this is what's known as a three-sided problem. And the problem with three-sided problems is that if you ever go to a venture capitalist and you say, hey, I'm going after a three-sided market, I have to get all three sides to go and adopt this, and then life will be kind of cool. And we can make things more secure, and payments will be better, and you won't have, like, my daughter is still kind of getting a refund because her car was broken into, her credit card got stolen, they charged things without her consent, whatever. I mean, just there are tons of problems with payments that we have the technology to solve, but the problem is one of adoption. It's not necessarily the technology, but you have to think, first of all, hey, how would you even architect this thing? If you're doing it from scratch, how do you architect the system so you avoid all the problems with payments that we experience today? And then, once you've solved that enormous problem that no one else has solved, then how do you get people to adopt it? Because it's like credit cards in the very early days that, okay, hey, we got this thing called the credit card, but no merchants take it and no consumers have it. But because credit cards enabled people to buy things with money that they didn't have, that actually got people interested. But it took, sort of 65 years to get to where we are today. And so now they're super entrenched, and as we heard in the earlier panel, coming up against entrenched competitors, they're not going to welcome you with open arms. So you're going in with a three-sided problem. You go to VCs and you say, hey, I'm solving this new payment system, three-sided market, and they go say bye-bye. Because if you have a one-sided market, it's like you have maybe a 5% chance of success. Now, if you do the math, you have a two-sided market. Well, you take 5% times 5%. Okay, take a three-sided market, and you take 5% times 5% times 5%, and it becomes near zero in terms of their return on investment. So they say, hey, look, we always lose money in two-sided markets unless it's like PayPal or eBay, where they've proven out the traction and they've taken out the risk. So three-sided markets are insane. But hey.
That's why I asked you.
So does anybody know how you solve the three-sided marketing problem? How do you get all three, how do you get adoption of three-sided market? Yeah, so you break it down. It's the old MIT trick, right? If you have a three, yeah. I guess they taught that there too. So what you do is you figure out, you try to find a way to take this three-sided problem, and the easiest way to tackle this, instead of trying to convince all three, is you try to figure out, how can I convince one guy to adopt? Because then, once I have that, then I just have a two-sided problem left. And so it turned out, we got super lucky. So it turns out that in the EU, you've got to look totally outside the country. In the EU, they have this mandate called PSD2, called Payment System Directive number 2. And it requires the banks to open up their architecture and have like a standardized API. And I said, my God, somebody up there is looking down on me, and this is my lucky day. And it turned out the timing was perfect, because we started a year ago on this. We couldn't figure out how the hell we were going to go do this. PSD2 came along, and we said, man, this is great. And so you can't just depend on one thing being in your favor, right? Because you're trying to do this really hard thing. So then we got IBM interested in partnering with us. And they're in most of the large banks, so that really helps to have a big player like IBM.
Can I stop you right there? Let's handle a very easy problem, although it's the biggest problem we have. Because how do you close a major industry deal with a company like IBM, like Google, these big ones? You are a startup. You're trying to close this deal. Tell us.
You got to be really lucky. Right place at the right time with the right people. So it wasn't like, we would never have approached IBM on our own, because they're slow, and it's like, who do you talk to, and people are busy with their priorities and so forth. So it's really hard to get traction at a big company, especially when you're a small company. When you're a big company talking to another big company, hey, they pay attention. You're a small company. Look, there are a lot of small companies out there. I'm a big company. Why should I pay attention to you? So you kind of go in. So we ended up going to this show called Sibos, which is where all of these bankers go. It's the cool show for bankers. It was in Singapore. We competed against 370 fintech startups from around the world. We tied for first place out of 370 startups at the show. That got IBM's attention. They said, okay, well, this is the hot technology. We should learn more about it. And the right people happened to be there that then referred us to other right people. And we just happened, the guy who was sponsoring the contest happened to work for IBM and happened to be interested in helping to shepherd startups through the process at IBM. And so, by the way, I'm not announcing any kind of relationship with IBM, just for disclaimer purposes. We haven't, So I'm just using that as a representative example of how you might do this. And so then then you are very surprised on how slowly things move in a startup versus big company. And it's just dramatically different. And banks are even slower. And so you adjust you go and you try to go at 100 miles an hour. Your big partner is moving very slowly, but you make sure that they're moving in the right direction. But it really helps to get lucky enough to be connected to someone inside the company who is your champion. And if you do not have that, you're almost dead. Right.
On that note, I only have one more question. What is your biggest accomplishment?
So it's actually kind of an anti-accomplishment. Larry Page came to me, and he said he had this cool idea called PageRank, and he was starting this company called Google. And did I want to buy the company for $1 million? And I said no. Had I said yes, the world would have changed. He would have gone nowhere. Disney would have clobbered it. It would have died. Nothing would have happened. And so because I said no, and because a lot of other people said no as well, he had to go to Kleiner Perkins and get $50 million and start Google. And so I helped to contribute in some small way to the creation of Google, and I think they've done a fantastic job.
So I don't know about you. Do you want this to be your parting words? This is what you
I've
got.
done other cool stuff as well, but I think that in terms of I like to do things that have impact. My anti-spam is used by Yahoo. It affects 200 million people. Works really well. I created FrameMaker, which is a publishing product. It's used by Apple to create their tech manuals. It's used to document Boeing 777s. Created the optical mouse, commercialized that. So just done a lot of things that, and I don't think there's any, I could probably go on for 10 minutes about some things that I'm proud of doing. I sponsored a bunch of researchers in glaucoma. And people ask me, why are you doing that? You don't have glaucoma. And I said, well, it's an interesting disease, and we think there are going to be some breakthroughs in it. And then about 15 years after I sponsored that research, then I came down with glaucoma. So the research that I sponsored 15 years ago, can help to lead to a cure to that. So sometimes you get lucky in doing things. But my life has been all about trying to make a difference in people's lives, and so that's.
Well, that's what I wanted to end with: making a difference in people's lives. Thank you very, very much. So on that note, people, making a difference in people's lives, we're going to make one more difference. I wanted to just show you that you can make a difference by coming to our events and taking part in this enormous endeavor, which is changing technology day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute with new systems. We have events every month on campus. We're going to be traveling. This is not going to be the last time you see us in the Valley. We're going to London in November, December. We'll probably be back in San Francisco before you know it, maybe even in May. We are taking MIT's startups and industry partnerships jointly, including the academic founders, on the road. And we need your help to do so. We need more of your input and ideas. And it's been fantastic to have you as an audience. I'll take a question.
Any of your events?
We are thinking about it. Start voting. We don't want to stream for no audience. It's been mixed, but we're thinking about it. We have all of this will be on archive definitely after a week, but we are thinking very hard about that. There is wine outside. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Samsung. I want to thank MIT for providing such an enormously fertile environment that it doesn't feel like work when I work the way we work. If you want to get in touch with me or other people, Startup Exchange is that's how I breathe and live. So get in touch with us. Thank you very, very much. Thanks a lot.